The East Side District of Los Angeles in 2010 represented a complex tapestry of working-class Hispanic American life. Bounded by major streets like Whittier Boulevard and Brooklyn Avenue, this neighborhood told stories of immigrant struggles, resilience, and generational transitions. It was here that the Rodriguez-Torres family had built their life over decades of hard work and determination. Linda Rodriguez-Torres, a 22-year-old woman with deep brown eyes and a determined demeanor, embodied the neighborhood's spirit of perseverance. Born and raised in Los Angeles, she was the product of a traditional Latino family. Her father, Miguel Rodriguez, a long-serving police officer, and her late mother, Elena, who had passed away from cancer when Linda was 16. At the local trucking company where she worked as an administrative assistant, Linda met Ramon Hernandez, a 27-year-old truck driver whose charm and confidence immediately caught her attention. Ramon stood 6 feet tall, with a muscular build typical of long-haul drivers. Originally from Jalisco, Mexico, he had immigrated to the United States with his family in the late 1990s, pursuing the quintessential American dream of opportunity and success. Miguel Rodriguez, a 45-year-old veteran of the Los Angeles Police Department, had spent over 2 decades serving in some of the city's most challenging districts. His career had taught him to read people quickly, a skill that now made him deeply suspicious of his daughter's new boyfriend. Standing 6'2", with a physique maintained through years of police work, Miguel represented the protective patriarch typical of Latino families. The Rodriguez family's history was marked by struggle and achievement. Miguel's parents had immigrated from Mexico in the 1960s, working multiple jobs to provide opportunities for their children. Miguel had been the first in his family to join law enforcement, a source of immense pride for his aging parents. Linda was following a different path, pursuing stability through administrative work and now, what she believed was love. When Ramon first met the Rodriguez family, he displayed a perfect blend of charm and respect. He spoke fluent Spanish, knew how to navigate family gatherings, and showed genuine interest in Linda's aspirations. He would arrive at family events in his truck driver uniform, bringing small gifts and showing a level of attentiveness that initially impressed Miguel. Their wedding, held at Our Lady of Guadalupe Catholic Church in the East Side District, was a traditional affair. Approximately 50 guests filled the small church, most of them family members and friends from the local community. The guest list represented a cross-section of immigrant Los Angeles: truck drivers, police officers, administrative workers, and small business owners. Miguel walked Linda down the aisle, his police uniform a testament to his professional pride. Despite his outward support, his trained eye observed Ramon with a mixture of concern and restrained skepticism. The wedding photographs would later become a painful reminder of the hopes and illusions of that day. The newlyweds initially settled in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on Soto Street, a typical residential area that reflected the economic realities of working-class Los Angeles. Ramon continued his work as a long-haul truck driver, often being away for extended periods. Linda maintained her administrative job, believing they were building a stable, promising life together. The first signs of domestic violence emerged subtly in the Rodriguez-Torres household, marking a gradual descent into a pattern of abuse that would define their marriage. The triggers were mundane, almost absurdly insignificant. A dinner prepared a few minutes later than Ramon's expected time, a television volume slightly too high, or a misplaced household item. These trivial moments would unexpectedly transform Ramon from a seemingly charismatic husband into a volatile, aggressive individual. Linda's work schedule at the trucking company administrative office meant she often arrived home later than Ramon, who would typically return from his long-haul routes exhausted and increasingly irritable. The apartment on Soto Street, once a symbol of their shared dreams, gradually became a pressure cooker of tension and fear. The first physical incident occurred on a Tuesday evening in late 2011. Linda had been delayed at work, completing month-end reports. When she arrived home, dinner was not immediately prepared. Ramon's frustration escalated quickly. What began as a verbal confrontation rapidly devolved into physical violence. He grabbed her arm, leaving bruises that would take weeks to fade. Psychological manipulation accompanied the physical abuse. Ramon began systematically isolating Linda from her support network. He would check her phone messages, monitor her social media accounts, and interrogate her about her daily activities. Any hint of independent communication with family or friends was met with aggressive questioning or threats. Linda, raised in a culture that often stigmatized discussing domestic problems, felt deep shame. Her father, a police officer with years of experience handling domestic violence cases, would be devastated if he knew the truth. She became an expert at concealing the evidence, carefully applied makeup to cover bruises, long-sleeved clothing to hide marks, and a carefully crafted narrative of marital harmony. The trucking company where Linda worked remained oblivious to her growing suffering. Her professional demeanor and consistent performance masked the turmoil in her personal life. Colleagues noticed subtle changes. She became more withdrawn, avoiding social interactions and company events where Ramon might be discussed. Miguel Rodriguez, despite his professional training in recognizing signs of domestic abuse, initially missed the subtle changes in his daughter. Linda had always been private, and her ability to maintain a composed exterior made it difficult to detect the underlying trauma. Their conversations became increasingly superficial, with Linda carefully controlling the narrative. Ramon's violent outbursts followed a predictable cycle. Periods of calm would be interrupted by explosive episodes of anger, followed by moments of apparent remorse and promises to change. He would bring Linda flowers, make grand romantic gestures, and temporarily revert to the charming man she had initially fallen in love with. The East Side District, with its close-knit community and cultural dynamics, became both a witness and an unwitting accomplice to Linda's suffering. Neighbors would later recall hearing occasional loud arguments, but choosing not to intervene, a common response in communities where domestic issues were often considered private family matters. By 2012, the pattern of abuse had become deeply entrenched. Linda had developed complex coping mechanisms, anticipating Ramon's moods, meticulously organizing their home to minimize potential triggers, and maintaining a facade of normalcy to the outside world. By 2015, the Rodriguez-Torres household had descended into a predictable cycle of abuse that had become the silent backdrop of Linda's existence. The once vibrant young woman was transforming before her father's eyes, a gradual metamorphosis marked by physical and psychological deterioration. Miguel Rodriguez began noticing the changes in his daughter with increasing alarm. Linda, who had always been athletic and energetic, was now a shadow of her former self. Her weight dropped dramatically, nearly 25 pounds less than her healthy baseline. The confident smile that once characterized her face had been replaced by a perpetual state of guardedness, her eyes constantly scanning her surroundings as if anticipating a potential threat. Ramon's control over Linda had become comprehensive and suffocating. Every aspect of her life was now monitored and manipulated. Her smartphone, once a tool of communication and connection, had become an instrument of surveillance. Ramon would meticulously check her call logs, text messages, and social media interactions, interrogating her about every contact and conversation. The isolation was methodical. Linda was prohibited from maintaining meaningful relationships outside of her marriage. Family gatherings became rare and carefully orchestrated events. When she did meet with her father or siblings, her conversations were carefully curated, always maintaining the facade that everything is fine. During one of their infrequent meetings at a small coffee shop near the East Side District Police Station, Miguel observed his daughter's behavior with growing concern. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her coffee cup, and she wore long-sleeved clothing despite the warm Los Angeles weather, a telltale sign of someone hiding physical evidence of abuse. Linda's professional life was not immune to Ramon's control. She had been forced to change jobs twice, each time under the pretext of better opportunities. But in reality, these were strategic moves to further isolate her from potential support networks. Her current administrative position was at a small trucking company where Ramon had connections, ensuring he could monitor her movements. The psychological manipulation was as destructive as the physical violence. Ramon would alternate between extreme aggression and calculated displays of affection. After particularly violent episodes, he would bring Linda expensive gifts, create elaborate romantic gestures, and temporarily revert to the charming personality that had initially drawn her to him. Miguel's police training made him acutely aware of the dynamics of domestic violence. He recognized the signs: the weight loss, the carefully constructed narratives, the visible fear that Linda tried desperately to conceal. Yet Linda's resistance to discussing her true situation left him feeling helpless. In private moments, when the facade momentarily cracked, Miguel would catch glimpses of his daughter's true emotional state. A sudden flinch at a loud noise, a reflexive movement to protect herself, the way she would unconsciously scan exit routes in any room. These were the subtle indicators of a life lived in constant fear. The East Side District, with its tight-knit community, became both a witness and an unwitting accomplice to Linda's suffering. Neighbors and acquaintances noticed changes, but adhered to an unspoken code of non-intervention. The cultural dynamics of the Latino community often prioritized maintaining family appearances over addressing internal conflicts. By late 2015, the spiral of violence had become a fully entrenched reality for Linda. Her world had shrunk to the confines of her controlled existence, with Ramon acting as both jailer and seemingly benevolent partner. The line between love and abuse had become so blurred that Linda could no longer distinguish between genuine affection and manipulation. Miguel watched his daughter's deterioration with a mixture of rage, frustration, and deep, consuming helplessness. As a police officer who had spent decades protecting others, he found himself unable to protect the person most precious to him, his own daughter. The incident occurred on December 15, 2017, a date that would be etched into the family's collective memory. Ramon Hernandez returned from a long-haul trucking route, his mood dark and unpredictable. The trigger was inconsequential. A misplaced set of keys, a slightly delayed dinner, the kind of trivial matter that had long been Ramon's pretext for violence. What began as a verbal argument quickly devolved into a savage physical assault. Ramon's rage was uncontrolled, transforming him from a truck driver into a violent predator. Linda, who had learned to anticipate and minimize his anger, found herself unable to escape the onslaught of physical violence. The beating was so severe that neighbors, initially hesitant to intervene in what they perceived as a private matter, eventually called the police. When first responders arrived, the scene was horrific. Linda lay unconscious, her body bearing multiple traumatic injuries that would require extensive medical intervention. At Good Samaritan Hospital in downtown Los Angeles, medical professionals documented the extent of Linda's injuries with clinical precision. Her medical record revealed multiple fractured ribs, 4th through 7th ribs, severe concussion with potential traumatic brain injury, extensive bruising covering 60% of her body, potential internal bleeding, numerous contusions and lacerations. Linda remained hospitalized for 8 days, drifting in and out of consciousness. The medical team was stunned by the severity of her injuries, with one senior nurse describing it as one of the worst domestic violence cases she had encountered in her 25-year career. Miguel Rodriguez's reaction was immediate and visceral. For the first time, his professional composure shattered completely. A veteran police officer who had maintained calm in countless high-tension situations found himself consumed by a primal paternal rage. When Ramon was initially questioned by detectives, he attempted to construct a narrative of self-defense. However, the physical evidence and witness statements quickly dismantled his fabricated account. Despite this, the legal system's response seemed frustratingly inadequate to Miguel. In a confrontation outside the hospital, Miguel explicitly threatened Ramon. "If you ever come near my daughter again, I will ensure you never walk free," he said, his years of law enforcement training barely restraining his potential for violence. The threat was calculated and deliberate, a moment where a father's love transformed into a potential instrument of retribution. Psychological evaluations later revealed the complex dynamics of Linda's response. Despite the catastrophic violence, she chose to forgive Ramon, a decision that baffled medical professionals and her family alike. This pattern, tragically common in domestic violence cases, reflected the deep psychological manipulation Linda had endured. The hospital social worker assigned to Linda's case documented her psychological state: extreme dependency on her abuser, diminished self-worth, complex trauma response, fear of potential retaliation if she pursued legal action. When Linda was finally discharged, she returned home with Ramon, a decision that devastated Miguel. The systemic failures that allowed such repeated violence became painfully apparent, a legal and social infrastructure that often failed to protect domestic violence victims. Miguel Rodriguez had spent over 2 decades in law enforcement, understanding that justice sometimes required methods beyond conventional legal channels. The unsolved murder from 2010 was a perfect opportunity to neutralize Ramon Hernandez, the man who had systematically destroyed his daughter's life. The cold case involved Carlos Mendoza, a 35-year-old truck driver found dead in an industrial area near the port of Los Angeles. The original investigation had stalled due to insufficient evidence and multiple competing theories about the murder's circumstances. Leveraging his intimate knowledge of police procedures and access to departmental databases, Miguel began a calculated process of manufacturing evidence. He understood precisely how to plant forensic traces that would withstand initial investigative scrutiny. Fingerprints from Ramon's trucking company logbooks were strategically positioned, and DNA evidence was subtly manipulated to create a compelling connection to the unsolved murder. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened the investigation in early 2018, seemingly motivated by the new evidence Miguel had carefully introduced. Detectives, believing they had a legitimate lead, began a thorough examination of Ramon Hernandez's potential involvement in the Mendoza murder. Ramon's arrest was executed with clinical precision. On a typical Wednesday morning, while preparing for a long-haul trucking route, he was taken into custody at his company's headquarters. The public nature of the arrest immediately cast him in a suspicious light, destroying his professional reputation and personal credibility. Legal proceedings moved swiftly. The manufactured evidence, combined with Ramon's documented history of domestic violence, created an overwhelming case against him. Prosecutors portrayed him as a dangerous individual with a propensity for violence, linking his personal history with the potential murder of Carlos Mendoza. During the trial, the prosecution presented a narrative that seemed insurmountable. Forensic experts testified about the planted evidence, which appeared remarkably convincing. Ramon's court-appointed attorney struggled to counter the seemingly solid case built against his client. In September 2018, Ramon Hernandez was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years in state prison. The verdict was delivered in a Los Angeles County courtroom, with Linda sitting silently in the back row, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. Miguel watched the proceedings with a sense of calculated satisfaction. He had not just sought revenge, he had systematically dismantled the man who had terrorized his daughter. The legal system, which had failed to protect Linda through conventional means, had now become his instrument of retribution. The trucking company immediately terminated Ramon's employment. His professional reputation was permanently destroyed, ensuring that even after potential release, reintegrating into normal society would be virtually impossible. Linda's psychological response to her husband's conviction was intricate. The sudden removal of the dominant figure who had controlled her life for years created an unexpected emotional void. She oscillated between feelings of relief, continued trauma, and a strange sense of loss. The East Side District community discussed the case in hushed tones. Some viewed Miguel as a protective father who had taken extraordinary measures to protect his daughter. Others saw his actions as a dangerous breach of professional ethics, a troubling exploitation of his law enforcement position. For Miguel, the conviction represented more than personal revenge. It was a calculated act of protection, ensuring that Ramon could never again harm his daughter or potentially other women. The legal system had failed Linda multiple times, and he had decided to become the instrument of justice himself. The arrest of Ramon Hernandez triggered a profound psychological transformation in Linda Rodriguez. What her father perceived as an act of protection, she viewed as the ultimate betrayal. Linda's perception of her father's actions was deeply distorted by her years of psychological manipulation. Ramon's imprisonment felt like a second violent disruption of her life, and she blamed Miguel entirely for this new upheaval. The victim mentality cultivated during years of abuse now morphed into a calculated desire for retribution. Her younger sister Elena Rodriguez, 24 years old, became her primary confidant and supporter in this vengeful mission. Elena harbored her own deep-seated resentment towards their father. She blamed Miguel for what she perceived as the destruction of their family. His interference had not only imprisoned Ramon, but had seemingly broken their family's structure forever. The sisters began meeting in secret, primarily in Elena's small apartment in the Boyle Heights neighborhood. Their conversations were methodical, discussing ways to exact revenge on Miguel Rodriguez. They analyzed his daily routine, understanding his professional patterns as a police officer in the Rampart Division. Linda's strategy was deliberate and patient. She began collecting money, taking extra shifts at her administrative job and cutting down on every possible expense. Her goal was to accumulate funds for what she was planning, a contract killing that would eliminate her father. By April 2019, Linda had collected $5,000, essentially the entire family's savings. This money represented not just financial resources, but a weapon of vengeance. Through a network of acquaintances in the Eastside District's more marginalized communities, she discreetly began searching for someone willing to carry out her plan. The criminal underworld of Los Angeles, with its complex networks and unspoken rules, provided the necessary connections. Linda's careful approach, using intermediaries, avoiding direct communication, maintaining plausible deniability, showed a level of strategic thinking that belied her previous portrayal as a passive victim. Elena played a crucial role in this plan. She would provide alibis, help gather information about their father's movements, and act as a communication buffer. The sisters' shared trauma and resentment had transformed their relationship into a dangerous alliance. Miguel Rodriguez remained unaware of the threat building against him. His professional training, which had helped him manipulate the system to imprison Ramon, now failed to protect him from the very family he believed he was protecting. On the night of the planned assassination, Miguel followed his typical routine. Returning home after a late shift at the Rampart Division, he parked his personal vehicle in front of his modest East Side District home. The area was quiet, typical of the late-night hours in this working-class neighborhood. The hired executor, whose identity would remain unknown, waited in the shadows. The attack was swift and professional, multiple gunshots ensuring immediate incapacitation. Miguel Rodriguez, the police officer who had thought he was protecting his daughter, fell victim to the very violence he had spent his career fighting against. The murder of Miguel Rodriguez initially appeared to be a standard street crime in the East Side District of Los Angeles. Investigators first approached the scene as a potential robbery gone wrong, a common occurrence in urban neighborhoods with complex socioeconomic dynamics. Initial evidence seemed to support the robbery theory. Miguel's service weapon remained in its holster, but certain personal items were missing from his possession. The crime scene suggested a quick, targeted action rather than a prolonged confrontation. Forensic teams meticulously collected evidence, searching for traces that would reveal the true nature of the crime. The Los Angeles Police Department's homicide unit, comprised of seasoned detectives, quickly began to unravel the complexities surrounding Miguel's murder. Colleagues who had worked with him for years brought both professional objectivity and personal investment to the investigation. Digital forensics played a crucial role in tracking the investigation's trajectory. Detectives began examining Linda Rodriguez's communication patterns, financial transactions, and social connections. Her recent history, including Ramon's imprisonment and the family's tumultuous dynamics, became a focal point of the investigation. Elena Rodriguez emerged as a critical figure in the investigation. Her attempts to protect her sister gradually unraveled under intense questioning. The sibling bond, forged through years of shared trauma, began to crumble under the weight of legal scrutiny and mounting evidence. Forensic evidence proved to be the investigation's turning point. Cellular phone records, financial transactions, and communication logs created a compelling narrative of premeditation. Investigators discovered a carefully constructed plan that pointed directly to Linda as the primary suspect in her father's murder. The arrest was conducted with surgical precision. On a cold November morning, Linda was taken into custody at her workplace, the trucking company administrative office where she had worked for years. The public nature of the arrest sent shockwaves through the East Side District community. The legal proceedings that followed were a complex examination of domestic violence, family trauma, and the intricate cycles of abuse and revenge. Linda's defense team struggled to present her as a victim, given the calculated nature of her father's murder. On December 15, 2019, precisely 2 years after the brutal beating that had hospitalized her, Linda Rodriguez stood trial for first-degree murder. The prosecution methodically dismantled any potential sympathy, portraying her as a calculated killer who had systematically planned her father's execution. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before delivering a unanimous verdict. Linda was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Her courtroom demeanor remained unchanged, a final testament to the profound psychological transformation she had undergone through years of abuse and trauma. Simultaneously, Ramon Hernandez faced additional legal consequences. His attempts to contact Linda and the threatening communications he made from prison resulted in an additional 5-year sentence. The legal system had effectively removed both of them from society permanently. Elena Rodriguez, now 25 years old, found herself completely alone, the last surviving member of a family destroyed by cycles of violence. She was left to carry the overwhelming weight of her family's tragic history. Her support network had been systematically dismantled, leaving her isolated and emotionally devastated. The Eastside District community struggled to process the complex narrative. Discussions ranged from viewing Linda as a victim pushed beyond her breaking point to seeing her as a cold-blooded murderer who had destroyed her own family. The truth remained in the nuanced space between these perspectives. Psychological experts who analyzed the case pointed to the profound impact of sustained domestic violence. Linda's actions were interpreted as an extreme manifestation of survival instinct, a desperate attempt to reclaim control after years of systematic abuse.